Elias Thorne stood in the grand foyer of Blackwood Manor, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. At 38, he had grown accustomed to disappointment, but this inheritance felt like a particularly cruel joke. The sprawling estate, with its Gothic revival architecture and endless rooms filled with what appeared to be worthless antiques, represented everything he had come to despise about his family's tendency toward grandiose gestures and impractical dreams. As a historian specializing in overlooked local narratives, Elias understood the weight of the past better than most. Yet understanding didn't translate to appreciation, especially when that past came with a mortgage, property taxes, and a reputation that made the locals cross themselves when mentioning the manor's name. His great-aunt Millicent had been eccentric at best, reclusive at worst, and her sudden death had left him with a burden he neither wanted nor could afford to maintain. The manila envelope from the estate lawyer sat on the dust-covered dining table, its contents a stark reminder of his financial reality. The numbers didn't lie. Keeping Blackwood Manor would bankrupt him within 6 months. An auction was his only viable option, though he doubted the collection of seemingly random objects would generate enough interest to cover even the outstanding debts. His grandfather's legacy loomed large in these calculations. Theodore Thorne had been a dreamer, an amateur inventor who had poured the family fortune into projects that never materialized. Elias had grown up hearing whispered stories of failed experiments, of a brilliant mind that couldn't translate ideas into practical success. The old man had died when Elias was 12, leaving behind nothing but debts and the lingering scent of disappointment that seemed to follow the Thorne name. Now, surrounded by Theodore's remaining possessions, strange brass instruments, half-finished mechanical devices, and journals filled with incomprehensible diagrams, Elias felt that familiar mixture of resentment and pity. His grandfather's idealism had cost the family dearly, and Elias refused to repeat those mistakes. The sound of footsteps on the front porch interrupted his brooding. Through the window, he spotted Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman from the village who had been appearing at the manor with increasing frequency over the past few weeks. She claimed to be interested in the historical significance of the estate, but her presence felt more intrusive than scholarly. "Mr. Thorne," she called as she entered uninvited, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I trust the preparations are progressing well?" Elias suppressed his irritation. "The auction is scheduled for Saturday. Everything will be catalogued and ready for bidding." Mrs. Gable nodded, her pale blue eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Elias uncomfortable. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and a way of moving that suggested she was far more spry than her age would indicate. Despite her seemingly frail appearance, there was something unsettling about her presence, as if she knew secrets that others didn't. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," she said, running her fingers along the edge of a mahogany side table. "Misunderstood, perhaps, but remarkable nonetheless." "You knew him?" Elias asked, surprised. Mrs. Gable had never mentioned a personal connection before. "Oh yes," she replied, but offered no further explanation. Instead, she moved toward a display case filled with Theodore's inventions. "Some things reveal themselves only when the time is right, Mr. Thorne. Patience can be a virtue." Before Elias could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone with his growing frustration and an odd sense that something important had just occurred, though he couldn't identify what. Over the following days, strange incidents began to plague the manor. Elias would carefully pack away his grandfather's pocket watch, an ornate piece that had stopped working decades ago, only to find it sitting on his nightstand the next morning. The first time, he assumed he had forgotten to pack it. The second time, he was certain he had locked it in a trunk. By the third occurrence, he was beginning to question his own sanity. The watch itself was peculiar, crafted from what appeared to be a mixture of metals that gave it an unusual patina. Despite being supposedly broken, Elias occasionally caught the faint sound of ticking, though the hands never moved. He had considered having it appraised, but the local jeweler had taken one look at it and declared it beyond repair with a finality that brooked no argument. Other objects began appearing in unexpected places. A brass compass with strange markings materialized on his desk. A peculiar lens, ground to an unusual thickness, turned up in the kitchen. A fragment of what appeared to be an old map found its way into his jacket pocket. Each discovery increased his frustration, as if the manor itself was conspiring to delay the auction. The situation became more complicated when Dr. Marcus Webb, a historian from Yale, contacted him about Theodore's journals. Webb's interest was specific and intense, focusing on particular entries that dealt with what he called theoretical applications of perpetual motion principles. The academic attention was flattering, but Elias suspected it was merely another dead end, another example of his grandfather's impractical theories attracting scholarly curiosity without practical value. "Your grandfather was ahead of his time," Webb explained during their phone conversation. "His understanding of mechanical principles was quite sophisticated. I'd be willing to make a substantial offer for his papers." The offer was tempting, but something about Webb's eagerness made Elias hesitate. He found himself deflecting the professor's requests, promising to consider the offer after the auction. The delay was unlike him. He typically made decisions quickly and moved on, but the manor seemed to be affecting his judgment in ways he couldn't explain. 3 days before the auction, a severe thunderstorm knocked out power to the entire valley. Elias found himself navigating the manor's dark corridors with oil lanterns, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm had damaged several windows, and the sound of wind through the house created an almost musical quality, as if the building itself was breathing. It was during this blackout that he discovered the hidden study. He had been searching for additional lanterns in what he believed was a storage closet when his shoulder struck what felt like a movable panel. The wall shifted slightly, revealing a narrow passage that led to a small room he had never seen before. The space was cramped but well-organized, filled with mechanical drawings, prototype devices, and what appeared to be a detailed blueprint of the manor itself. The drawings were unlike anything he had seen among his grandfather's other papers. These were precise, technical, and bore the markings of someone who understood engineering principles at a level that contradicted everything Elias had been told about Theodore's amateur status. The blueprint of the manor was particularly intriguing, showing hidden passages, concealed compartments, and what appeared to be a complex system of mechanical connections throughout the building. As he examined the papers by lantern light, Elias accidentally triggered something, a lever hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The sound of gears turning echoed through the walls, followed by a series of mechanical clicks that seemed to reverberate throughout the house. Panicking, he quickly replaced the floorboard and retreated from the hidden room, convinced he had broken something valuable. The next morning, with power restored, Elias tried to locate the hidden study again but found only solid wall. He began to doubt his own memory, wondering if the storm and the stress of the impending auction had affected his perception. The experience left him unsettled, as if he had glimpsed something important that was now beyond his reach. Mrs. Gable's visits increased in frequency as the auction approached. She would appear at odd hours, sometimes before dawn, sometimes after dusk, always with that same knowing expression. Her comments became more cryptic, references to preparations and the right moment that made no sense to Elias. He began to suspect she was suffering from some form of dementia, though her movements and speech patterns suggested otherwise. "Your grandfather understood the importance of timing," she said during one of these visits, examining an ornate wooden cabinet that Elias had catalogued as decorative furniture, circa 1890. "Some revelations require patience, Mr. Thorne. They cannot be rushed." The cabinet was indeed beautiful, crafted from what appeared to be multiple types of wood in an intricate pattern that seemed to shift depending on the viewing angle. It stood about 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, with no visible means of opening. Elias had assumed it was purely decorative, perhaps a display piece created by a skilled craftsman. Now, watching Mrs. Gable's intense focus on the piece, he wondered if there was more to it than he had realized. The morning of the auction arrived with unseasonable warmth and brilliant sunshine. Elias had expected a modest crowd, perhaps a dozen antique dealers and curious locals, but the turnout exceeded his expectations. Cars filled the circular drive, and people wandered through the manor's rooms with the careful attention of serious collectors. The auctioneer, a professional from the city, had arrived early to review the lots and seemed pleased with the level of interest. Among the attendees, Elias noticed Dr. Webb, who had made the trip from New Haven specifically for Theodore's papers. There were also several individuals he didn't recognize, people who moved through the collection with the focused intensity of experts. The attention was gratifying, though he tried to maintain his emotional distance from the proceedings. The auction began with smaller items, household goods, furniture, and decorative objects that generated modest interest. As the morning progressed, the bidding became more competitive, particularly for pieces that showed superior craftsmanship. Elias found himself surprised by the values being assigned to objects he had considered worthless, and for the first time, he began to hope that the proceeds might actually cover his debts. The lot containing his grandfather's miscellaneous scientific curiosities was scheduled for mid-afternoon. This collection included the pocket watch, the compass, the lens, and several other mechanical devices that Elias had been unable to identify. The auctioneer had grouped them together, assuming they would appeal to collectors of unusual items or perhaps someone interested in the history of amateur invention. As the moment approached, Elias felt an unexpected pang of regret. These objects represented his grandfather's life work, his passion and dedication to understanding the world through mechanical principles. Selling them felt like a betrayal, though he couldn't explain why. Theodore had been dead for over 25 years, and his inventions had never produced anything of practical value. The auctioneer was just beginning his description of the lot when Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the crowd with startling clarity. "Mr. Thorne," she called, her tone carrying an authority that silenced the room. "Before we proceed, might I suggest a demonstration?" The crowd turned to look at her, and Elias was struck by the transformation in her appearance. Gone was the elderly woman who had seemed confused and overly talkative. In her place stood someone who commanded attention, whose presence filled the space with an almost palpable energy. "I beg your pardon," the auctioneer replied, clearly confused by the interruption. Mrs. Gable smiled, but her eyes remained fixed on Elias. "Mr. Thorne, would you be so kind as to retrieve your grandfather's pocket watch from that lot? I believe it's time for a proper introduction to Theodore's true legacy." Something in her tone made resistance impossible. Elias found himself walking to the display table, picking up the familiar weight of the pocket watch. As his fingers closed around it, he felt a subtle vibration, as if the device was responding to his touch. "Now," Mrs. Gable continued, moving toward the ornate wooden cabinet, "if you would follow me, we can finally reveal what your grandfather spent his life creating." The crowd followed, sensing that something significant was about to occur. Elias felt his heart racing as Mrs. Gable positioned herself beside the cabinet, her hands moving over its surface with the familiarity of long practice. "Theodore Thorne was not the failed inventor that history remembers," she announced to the assembled crowd. "He was a genius who understood that some discoveries are too important to be revealed carelessly. He designed this cabinet as both a hiding place and a test, believing that only someone with the proper combination of knowledge, intuition, and family connection would be able to unlock his greatest achievement." She turned to Elias, her expression serious, but kind. "The pocket watch is not merely a timepiece, Mr. Thorne. It is a key. The compass, the lens, and the other objects you've been finding, they are components of a mechanism that your grandfather spent 40 years perfecting." Under her guidance, Elias approached the cabinet. She showed him a nearly invisible slot in the wood grain, precisely sized to accommodate the watch. As he inserted it, he heard the first mechanical sound, a deep, resonant click that seemed to come from within the cabinet itself. "The compass," Mrs. Gable instructed, pointing to a subtle depression in the cabinet's surface. "Turn it to true north, then rotate clockwise by exactly 45 degrees. The compass fit perfectly, and as Elias turned it, more mechanical sounds emerged from within the cabinet. Gears were turning, mechanisms were engaging, and the entire piece seemed to come alive with subtle vibrations. "The lens," she continued, indicating a small aperture that aligned with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. Position it so that the light passes through at precisely the right angle. As Elias made the adjustment, the cabinet began to transform. What had appeared to be solid wood panels started to shift and rotate, revealing hidden compartments and mechanical components. The crowd gasped as the entire structure unfolded like an elaborate puzzle box, each movement perfectly timed and executed. But the true marvel was what emerged from the cabinet's interior. As the final panel slid away, it revealed a device that defied immediate explanation. It was clearly mechanical, composed of gleaming brass and steel components arranged in a complex pattern that seemed to follow mathematical principles. Wheels turned within wheels, counterweights moved in perfect harmony, and a series of pendulums swung in synchronized patterns that created a hypnotic visual effect. The device hummed with quiet energy, its various components moving in perpetual motion without any visible source of power. It was beautiful and impossible, a testament to mechanical engineering that transcended conventional understanding. "A perpetual motion machine," Dr. Webb whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Theodore actually did it." Mrs. Gable nodded, her expression filled with pride and satisfaction. Theodore understood that the scientific community of his time was not ready for such a discovery. He chose to hide his achievement, to wait for the right moment when it could be revealed safely. "He designed this test for you, Mr. Thorne, believing that only a historian, someone who could read clues and connect disparate pieces of information, would be able to unlock the secret." Elias stood transfixed, watching the device operate with flawless precision. The cynicism that had defined his relationship with his grandfather's memory crumbled away, replaced by wonder and profound regret. Theodore had not been a failure or a dreamer. He had been a visionary whose achievements had been hidden in plain sight. "The manor's reputation," Mrs. Gable continued, "the stories of it being cursed, Theodore cultivated those rumors to protect his work. He knew that people would avoid investigating too closely if they believed the place was haunted or unlucky." The crowd pressed closer, each person trying to understand what they were witnessing. The device continued its operation, its movements creating subtle changes in the air around it. Instruments throughout the manor began to respond. Clocks that had been stopped for decades suddenly began ticking in synchronization, and the building itself seemed to resonate with the machine's frequency.
"How?"
Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Theodore discovered principles that conventional physics considered impossible," Mrs. Gable explained. "He understood that the universe operates on levels of complexity that most people cannot perceive. This device doesn't violate the laws of thermodynamics. It works in harmony with forces that science has yet to fully understand." As the reality of the discovery sank in, Elias felt a profound shift in his understanding of his family's legacy. The financial struggles, the ridicule, the years of perceived failure, all of it had been a carefully constructed facade to protect something infinitely more valuable than money or reputation. The auction was suspended, of course. Word of the discovery spread rapidly, and within hours, scientists and journalists from around the world were making their way to Blackwood Manor. The device was authenticated by experts who confirmed that it operated without any conventional power source, challenging fundamental assumptions about energy and motion. Dr. Webb's offer for the papers was withdrawn, replaced by a proposal for a comprehensive research partnership. Universities competed to establish study programs at the manor, and the estate that Elias had considered a burden became the most important scientific site in the world. But the most significant change was internal. As Elias stood in the now bustling manor, surrounded by researchers and equipment, he felt a connection to his grandfather that transcended the physical evidence of Theodore's genius. The pocket watch, now permanently installed in the cabinet's mechanism, ticked with a rhythm that seemed to match his own heartbeat. Mrs. Gable approached him as the sun began to set, her role as guardian of the secret now complete. "He would have been proud of you," she said simply. "Theodore always believed that understanding comes to those who are willing to look beyond the obvious." "You were his apprentice," Elias said, understanding finally dawning. "You helped him build all of this." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with decades of carefully kept secrets. "I was his partner in every sense that mattered. We worked together for 30 years, perfecting the mechanism, preparing for the day when the world would be ready to accept what we had discovered. As the evening progressed, Elias found himself in the hidden study, now permanently accessible thanks to the cabinet's activation. The drawings and blueprints revealed the full scope of Theodore's vision, not just the perpetual motion device, but an entire system of mechanical principles that could revolutionize human understanding of energy and motion. The manor itself was part of the design, its architecture incorporating elements that amplified and channeled the device's energy. The strange occurrences Elias had experienced, the objects appearing in unexpected places, the sounds in the walls, the sense of the building being alive, all of it had been the manor responding to his presence, recognizing him as Theodore's heir and preparing for the moment of revelation. Months later, Blackwood Manor had been transformed into a research institute, attracting brilliant minds from around the world. Elias, now recognized as the curator of one of the most significant scientific discoveries in human history, had found his calling not in selling the past but in preserving and sharing it. The pocket watch, still ticking in its place within the cabinet's mechanism, had become a symbol of the perseverance and vision that had made the discovery possible. When visitors asked about the significance of the timepiece, Elias would explain that it represented more than mere mechanical precision. It embodied the patience required to achieve the impossible and the faith necessary to believe in dreams that others cannot see. Standing in the grand foyer where his journey had begun, Elias often reflected on the transformation that had occurred. The dust was gone, replaced by the equipment and energy of active research. The grimy windows had been cleaned, allowing natural light to illuminate the space where Theodore's greatest achievement continued to operate with flawless precision. But perhaps the most important change was in Elias himself. The cynicism that had defined his relationship with his family's legacy had been replaced by a deep appreciation for the power of vision and the importance of preserving knowledge for future generations. He had learned that true worth couldn't be measured in monetary terms, and that the greatest discoveries often came disguised as apparent failures. The ticking of the pocket watch provided a constant reminder of these lessons, its rhythm marking not just the passage of time, but the patient accumulation of understanding that defines human progress. Theodore's legacy lived on, not as a burden to be discarded, but as a gift to be shared with the world. As Elias watched the sunset through the now sparkling windows of Blackwood Manor, he felt a profound sense of completion. The weight of the past had been transformed into the foundation for the future, and the Thorne family name would be remembered not for its failures, but for its contributions to human knowledge and understanding. The pocket watch continued its eternal ticking, marking the moments of a legacy that would endure long after its current guardians had passed into history.